All right, everyone, it's the top of the hour, so I would like to thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join us. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to recognize that New Mexico, as a state and a community, is experiencing ongoing and devastating wildfires. Our hearts go out to all of the communities that are evacuated, the residents who have lost homes, and the fire personnel who are working so hard to contain these fires. This is a difficult time, and there's a long road of wildfire recovery ahead. We want to ensure you all are aware of resources which may be helpful in this challenging time. Those may be found through the FactNM webpage, the Forest Steward's Guild social media platforms, and we will also post these links in the chat. So to kick off introductions, my name is Rachel Bean, and along with my colleague, Gabe Collar, we work for the Forest Steward's Guild in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Within that role, I help coordinate learning exchange webinars like the one you are here for today. So with that, I am pleased to introduce today's presenters, Chris Barth and James Meldrum with the Wildfire Research team, also called WiRē, an interagency group that has been around for about 20 years. Chris is a fire mitigation specialist with BLM Montana and the Dakotas Fire and Aviation Management. Chris works with the public, internal and external partners, elected officials, and the media to communicate fire management strategies and disaster response planning and fire adaptation concepts. He's received several national awards for his work to reduce community wildfire risk, and he is a founding member and subject matter expert for the WiRē team, with research interests in homeowners' attitudes toward wildfire mitigation and public perception of wildfire risk. He has co-authored papers on homeowners' attitudes towards wildfire mitigation and public perception of wildfire risk. He has also presented at national and international conferences related to his work in this field. Chris has worked in fire management for more than 30 years. He is a public information officer on a Type 1 incident management team. As a PIO, Chris's communication style is shaped by his operational, professional, and research experiences. James is an applied research economist with the U.S. Geological Survey's Social and Economic Analysis branch in Fort Collins, Colorado. James is a founding member of the Wildfire Research team, a long-standing collaboration between wildfire risk mitigation practitioners and social science researchers. Through more than 10 years of partnership, he has published numerous journal articles on mitigating the risks of wildland fire. In addition to his work with the WiRē team, James investigates the effects of natural resource decisions on people in numerous contexts, including fuels and fire management, ecosystem restoration, electricity generation, and the management of invasive species. We are glad to have them both here with us today to speak, and with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and James.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rachel and Gabe, for the introduction and also for the invitation to speak today. Just before I launch in, a couple real quick points. I'm James, that's Chris on the other screen, and he and I will be jumping back and forth throughout the presentation, really trying to show how there's a shared perspective through the work that we do from the research and the application side. We really spend a lot of time working and thinking and talking in this approach, and we're hoping to represent that accurately through our presentation today. So I'd like to start off thanking everyone for attending, and definitely want to echo some of the things that Rachel said. I recognize there's lots of fire activity in New Mexico. There are a lot of things going on. It's an evening, everybody has things to do. So really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us for an hour. We hope this is informative and interesting. And we really do look forward to an engaged discussion, whether through the conversation here, or by all means, feel free to reach out to Chris or myself after this, and we can continue the conversations. This work really means a lot to us. It's our day jobs, and it's also what we spend a lot of time thinking about. So getting out and reaching people and talking with people is an important part of what we do. So we're very excited to be here. One final preliminary, there is a disclaimer on the bottom of the slide. This is funded by the government, partially supported by the government. So there's a standard government disclaimer there, but this is recorded, and most of what we're presenting today is referring to a published paper that is open access that everyone is welcome to download. And again, you're also welcome to talk to us for more information. So with that, I'm going to launch into our presentation. So on October 21st, 2020, the East Troublesome Fire Perimeter map looked a lot like this. 24 hours later, the map looked like this. These two maps are roughly the same scale. It expanded massively by about 87,000 acres. The fire was fueled by a widespread drought, numerous dead and downed beetle-killed trees, red flag weather, including high winds and dry conditions, and poor humidity recovery overnight. So it was pretty extreme fire behavior. On the edge of the path of this rapid fire spread, there's a community of Columbine Lake in Grand County, Colorado, which was a part of a previous WiRē project with the Grand County Wildfire Council, who had conducted a rapid assessment there about a year before the fire. Despite receiving what one fire chief described as a glancing blow that swept through the edge of the community, 26 of 461 structures that had been assessed in that community were destroyed by the fire. Within the fire perimeter, about 1 out of every 5 homes was destroyed. So this is really the context of what we're talking about today. And so our presentation is going to roughly follow this outline. We're going to say first, why did we have data here? What is the type of work that we do? Second, what can we learn specifically from this fire? This is, of course, a very unfortunate event, but what we're trying to do is leverage that, make the most out of this unfortunate situation so that we can learn and hopefully reduce the risk going forward. And then finally, that's the third piece, is how can the type of data that we collect help reduce the risk? So first, I want to start with the question of why were we working there in the first place? And so to do that, I want to describe who we are and what we do, and what do I even mean by we? So when I'm referring to we, I'm talking about the Wildfire Research team. And this is an interagency, interdisciplinary group that's been working together for 10 plus years. It's an organization involving U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, where Chris is, the U.S. Geological Survey, where I am, and researchers at the University of Colorado. And we're coming from a variety of different perspectives, ranging from wildfire risk mitigation and the very applied side that Chris here represents tonight, to the much more academic side of thinking about decisions that people make regarding risk, and what are the influences on decisions, and where do people get information. And so bringing different social science perspectives, primarily economics and sociology, but really marrying these perspectives together. A few years ago, after working together for a long time, we also helped stand up an independent nonprofit, the Wildfire Research Center. And this center is an organization that now can help implement the work with more partnerships, and is very closely tied to this research effort, while also working in many different communities across the Western United States. And so that largely is what we're referring to when we're saying we throughout this. You can see the link to the website there, and I imagine somewhere in the materials or in the chats, you can access that link as well. And so we're a team that's working together, but what is it that we do? Largely, we're working within the context of the National Cohesive Wildfire Management Strategy. I imagine all of you, or most of you, are familiar with what that is, but just the real quick rundown is that it's a coordinated approach across the federal agencies of dealing with the issues of wildland fires. So this has been in place for, I believe, 15 years or so, and it really is kind of an organizing principle, an organizing concept driving a lot of the work done throughout a lot of different organizations. The vision is to safely and effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire where allowable, manage our natural resources, and as a nation, live with fire. There's 3 overlapping or integrated goals there: restoring and maintaining landscapes, supporting fire adapted communities, and then safe and effective wildfire response. So the work that we as WiRē does really focuses primarily on the fire adapted communities. And so on the right here, this is a graphic showing kind of the universe of things that the fire adapted communities concept works towards. And so there's a lot of different things involving communities being prepared for and safe when a fire comes through, or if a fire comes through. The work that we as WiRē does really focuses primarily on resident mitigation. So different actions related to this are things like the FireWise USA program, production of defense and maintenance of defensible space, home hardening, and then also things like Wildfire Prep Week. So that's kind of the primary area where we focus, but we also, our work touches on a variety of different places. And this is just important to note that we really recognize the importance of relationships and interactions between the different, not just the different players, but also the different actions being taken place. And this is a very complex space, but it's also a very integrated space. So we really value working in partnerships with different communities and different organizations and trying to really inform this broader, more cohesive picture. So that's kind of the broader context where we're working. And so what does it mean when we go and work in a place? And so we as an organization, those agencies and the nonprofit that I was describing, the way we really operate is we work in close partnership with local, regional, state, or nonprofit organizations. And the crux of what we do is we really support whatever the locally focused organization that is interested in supporting that wildfire risk mitigation on private property. We support them in collecting and understanding two different types of data. There's a rapid parcel-level risk assessment, and that's going to be our primary focus today. And so we'll go into a lot more detail of what these things are, but I just want to give kind of the bigger picture right now before we launch into it. So it's the rapid parcel-level risk assessment. And then there's also a household social survey. And this household social survey goes to all households that were assessed in the rapid assessment, and that allows us to produce this paired data set. And that matches what a property looks like from an external perspective with the people who are living on that property, the way that they're thinking about it, the way that they see the property, and the way that they think about wildfire risk. And so based on this set of information that's built in detail for individual communities, we kind of have three different main objectives that we're focusing on, or three different areas where we're working. First is really this emphasis of supporting the local organizations in reducing the parcel level risk. So when we're working with these organizations, it's not just a case of going because it's a unique opportunity to collect data for research, but it really is about empowering the local organizations to help them understand the people that they're working with, what they might need, understand the risk profile of that community, and then try to come up with better opportunities or things that can be done to help address that risk. The middle column, or the middle box, is understanding residents' decisions about wildfire risk. And this is the part where we're, particularly from the research perspective, we're wanting to engage with a broader conversation of what it means to have people living in this risky environment and then making decisions, and then what can we do about that? So this is where we focus on, we try to publish regularly in the academic literature. So for example, the paper that we're talking about today, that's gone through peer review. This is published, and is something that we hope engages in a much broader conversation. It's not just focused on wildfire risk, but also natural hazards more generally, or decisions under uncertainty or risk, which, as you can imagine, goes into a lot of different domains. And so part of why I'm focusing on this is it's an important element of our work, but it also speaks to part of the way that we're doing things. A lot of what we talk about, we really try to focus on the important elements. So today, the audience here is not necessarily an academic audience. I know many of you probably are very well educated, but you're not focused on the research. So we're not focusing on the research underpinnings of our work. But a lot of what we do is built on foundations of sociological theory or economics theory, and a lot of specific detailed survey design type research. So again, this is kind of that marrying of perspectives of the academic side, as well as the applications and the hands-on of working with communities, as well as the wildfire risk. And then the third box is an area where we really try to develop and test evidence-based outreach and engagement programs. And we're not going to talk about this too much today, but again, it's an important part of just demonstrating that to us, it's really important to move. We're not just about collecting information or even just understanding that information, but really moving and helping local organizations move towards action and trying to figure out and experiment and develop better ways to be more effective at using the information that is developed. So that's just kind of the broad universe. I know that's a lot of background information, but just wanted to provide some context of who we are and what we're doing here. And with that, we're going to start going into a little bit more detail on particularly the rapid assessment. And so I'll hand it over to Chris now to do some speaking.
Yeah, thanks, James. And before I get started on the slide, I just want to also take a moment to thank you all for being here, for the folks that are on Zoom and on Facebook. And then also for those folks that are going to be watching this later, we really appreciate your interest in this, in the work that we do, and hopefully it provides some useful information as you're trying to address the challenges of looking at wildfire risk in your communities. Also want to echo what was said from Rachel's opening comments and sentiments expressed by both her and Gabe earlier about what New Mexico and really all of the Southwest is facing right now. I actually just returned from Arizona on the tunnel fire, and so definitely not that we had the same kind of fire activity there as you all are seeing in New Mexico, at least on our fire, but definitely sharing a concern and understanding about how very real that fire activity and fire behavior has been, and the impacts that it's had on communities. So, you know, as James said, we'll try and bounce back and forth. I didn't want to interrupt him in those earlier slides because he was doing such a great job, but we might, as we go through this, you know, continue to be dynamic and hand it back and forth. And lastly, before I talk a little bit about the rapid assessment, I do also want to specifically say hi to the folks on the Zoom meeting today. I recognize particularly the couple of names that I recognize. So thanks for those of you that are on watching us. So again, as you know, James was talking about, our work is really supporting the fire adapted communities tenet of the cohesive strategy. And as James said, you know, in that previous slide, really laying out how important that paired what rapid parcel level wildfire risk assessment is with the household survey. And that rapid wildfire risk assessment, or what we call the RA, or that parcel assessment, we sometimes refer to it as a 60-second assessment. And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute. But we find, you know, that's really at the root of what we do, along with that household survey, and really helps us inform the partners that we're working with on how they can find more action and meaning with the work that they're doing in their communities. So the WiRē rapid parcel level risk assessment has really been developed over the past 2 decades. You know, as we talked about, we've you know, been together officially for, you know, a little over 10 years, but some of this work really started about 20 years ago. And it's based on the most current scientific information that's available. We have iterated and worked on our rapid assessment with our partners over the years to provide, you know, continuous improvements to the risk assessment and the related tools. So it has roots in some of my early work. Again, I represent the practitioner side on the WiRē team and the advisory group of WiRē. And my work, you know, spans, you know, going back 30 years as a firefighter and working through as a wildfire mitigation practitioner, and now, you know, as a state program lead for mitigation and an incident management team command staff. So this work, this rapid assessment information that you're seeing on the screen, really has its roots in my early work as a practitioner, working for a fire department in a large WUI community. We've had conversations about it with other partners and other folks that are doing similar work. We've had it reviewed by folks like Jack Cohen. I know a lot of folks are probably familiar with Jack Cohen, and in conjunction with the home ignition zone work that's been done there, or the HIZ work. You know, as new science becomes available, including some studies about proximity to adjacent structures, which, as folks know, is becoming more and more of a consideration and concern in places like the Marshall Fire or the Waldo Fire years ago, when you know, just that really close or that limited setbacks between homes leads to a conflagration of homes, and really is a root cause for a lot of home destruction. So again, when information about things like that come out, you know, I know the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or IBHS, is working on that to have some some hard numbers related to that, but we're incorporating that information to maintain a relevant tool for our partners. So getting into the specifics, if you look at the table in the screen, there's 4 broad categories, and those 4 broad categories are parcel level hazard. We've got defensible space, access, and structure. And each of those categories have several attributes associated with them. And again, folks can read those on the screen, but we cluster those attributes in these broad categories to kind of talk about. We found that it's helped us kind of look at some of the issues that we're finding in our communities that we've worked with, and it really helps us. Understand. Sorry, I just want to respond to that comment. I couldn't see if that was somebody saying I can read, or okay, sorry, you can read that. Okay, I just want to make sure somebody wasn't saying they couldn't read the screen. So, in addition to providing a description about the conditions on the parcel. We look at these different things. We want to understand what the condition is on the parcel when we're doing the risk assessment. Like, we want to understand what the distance to dangerous topography, because we know that has an effect on fire behavior. We want to understand things like slope. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the comments, and we'll be getting to that here in just a second. So we understand things about defensible space and understanding what the conditions are on the property. So we can provide actionable information to the partners that we're working with on what a more ideal condition might be for the residents, and then really ultimately get to how those wildfire organizations can address the risk in the communities that they have responsibility for. We also want to be mindful of the limitations of time and funding that a lot of these organizations have. So again, I spoke about 60-second rapid assessment. So looking at how can partners really go out and get a broad understanding of wildfire risk in a community without spending an exorbitant amount of time. Like, a lot of times some people will do site visits or a one-on-one hour-long visit looking at the property with a landowner or property owner, and that's fantastic. But as you can imagine, there's a limited ability to do that kind of work. And there's a limited time to be able to do that kind of work for every parcel or every house in your area. And so having this ability to go out and look at everything in a community, understand a baseline risk, and to be able to work from that, and then looking at the next stages of what might need to happen, whether that is an on-site or some cost share or some other financial incentives to help people be motivated to do the work. But want to really start with this baseline and this rapid understanding of a whole community. And it really pairs nicely with the household survey, as we've been talking about. Again, that household survey, the RA allows us to prepare the professional assessment. So we work with partners in all of these places. They go out and do these rapid assessments. We're able to pair that with looking at those same categories and attributes that are done in the RA. We compare those with information in the household survey that's administered to the same households. So every house that gets an RA gets a household survey, and we're able to understand how they view these same things that are on the screen. Looking at it allows us to kind of understand where their perception of these things differs. So a lot of times in some of our projects, we find that people are underestimating specifically defensible space. They think they have more defensible space than they actually do. So it's a great tool, right? As a practitioner, folks are able to understand, like, okay, I need to really make sure people, like, I'm talking about these things so they understand what defensible space they have compared to what they might think they do. And again, these are the information, the personal information is removed from this process, but you do get a sense of, in this community, we are seeing that people are underestimating this particular attribute, and we can take action towards that. So again, the paired data approach, which James mentioned, and again, this information is geocoded, is unique to the work that we've been doing. And we also provide guidance and tools to our partners for all steps in the process, including the training for the rapid assessments. We have a product that's called Assessor Reference Guide to really kind of help folks that are out in the field collect this and answer questions. And again, based on the work that we do with partners, kind of continue to iterate that process and improve it. And then a GIS-based field tool so people can go out and collect the data. Next slide. All right, so again, appreciate folks kind of getting the background as we kind of lead into the project that we're going to be talking about in Columbine Lakes and East Troublesome Fire, but just wanting for those that might not have as much of a background in this, want to make sure that folks are understanding what went into this project. So again, working with a lot of partners across many Western states. A lot of the initial work was in Colorado. I know there's some folks here on that participated in some of that work. However, we branched out, worked in other areas, including Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we have a project that's been going on. So just in folks in some of your backyards, we've been working with Santa Fe, and hope to be able to share that information as it becomes available as we work on the final parts of that project. And so a lot of these partners have been approaching wildfire risk and mitigation challenges with some commonly used tools. And the partner that we're going to be talking about today was in a similar boat. They had cost shares, they had shipping programs, they had different things that they offered. A lot of folks are just, putting out, education and outreach based on, some other feedback. And some are just starting out, trying to figure out what they might be doing. So regardless of where they're at in the spectrum, the data and information from residents in their community help them structure the programs that they offer in a way that's more in alignment with the needs of their residents. So some examples, programs that have used cost shares. With some of the data we found in the past, they've been able to actually, there's a lower amount that people are asking to receive in terms of doing the mitigation work. The partner was offering a higher cost share rate, and based on the feedback in these paired household survey risk assessment in a community in Colorado, that organization was able to reduce the amount that they offered through their cost share, which allows them to provide more funding to more homes and get more work done. Another example is working in Washington. A partner that we worked with was planning to provide information via a community meeting, and resoundingly heard from the community that community meetings weren't the way that they wanted to get information. They preferred to receive electronic newsletters or emails to get information. And so they would have spent a lot of time, wasted time potentially, having people come to a community when really people wanted to receive it a different way. So again, I appreciate folks sitting through the background to really understand a little bit about WiRē, and I'm going to hand it back to James to talk about the specifics of our project with Grand County Wildfire Council, which did provide us this unique opportunity to work in a community both pre and post fire and explore what happened as a result of the East Troublesome Fire. So James, back to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. So as Chris was saying, at any given time, we tend to be active on 4 or so projects with a lot of continuing ones. And so this Grand County Wildfire Council project is an example of that. So our main partner in this was an umbrella organization working across the county and working with the many different fire protection districts there. So we had the primary partner, but we also have the 5 individual fire protection districts here. They're listed on this slide. And you can see the number of parcels in each of the fire protection districts. Obviously, there's a lot more homes than that in each given district, but what a key part of the way that our work operates is it really focuses in on detailed looks at an individual community. And there's a lot of important reasons for that, but one of the key things that this provides an opportunity to look at all the residential parcels. And we've seen in our work from both the RA side and the survey side that you have a lot of very important variation from one home to the next. Different areas, different roads or cul-de-sacs within a community, there's a lot of variation going across them. So if you're doing convenience sampling or representative sampling even, when you're just pulling a few houses or a few observations from in a community, you might not have a good sense of how things might change or how might vary from one property to another. And this is really important if you're thinking about wanting to engage a broader community. So that kind of sets up why we're working in this case and why we have the rapid assessment data for an entire community, because it's a really important aspect of the way that we do our work. So as far as the timing of what happened here, May 2019, we sent out an initial letter introducing the local areas saying, hey, we're going to be involved in this project. just kind of set the stage and get people hopefully a little interested in what's going on. Summer 2019 is when Grand County Wildfire Council, as well as representatives from each of these fire districts, went out and conducted the rapid assessments. And so they were all trained and went through a standardized process and using the standardized tools. And these are fire professionals. These are folks that look at the property and they're looking at all the properties within a given community. And so they're using the same lens, and that helps really provide a more objective, clear view of how the risk might vary, or the different attributes might vary across different properties within the community. Then, as so often happens in life, there were a variety of uncontrollable factors that slowed the project down a little bit, but then the survey was administered about a year later. And don't need to go into it too much detail, but this follows standard social science practices, best practices of how to really make sure you get the highest response rate possible. And we find that it generally works really well here in these communities over this entire research area. We had over a 50% response rate, which really speaks to the value of having the local practitioners involved throughout this entire process. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's their data that they're collecting for their purposes, and the messaging supports that, and that really helps increase the survey response rate. If you're familiar at all with social science research, it's not uncommon to see things in the teens, even single digits, being published studies. And we argue, if you're trying to really understand what's going on in a detailed area, like a community of a few hundred homes, you really need this detailed information. And so we have a lot of confidence because of these high response rates that we're really representing the perspectives of people who are living there. And then the rapid assessment, of course, is being conducted from the roadside. So that's getting all the homes within a given community. So this is the timing. The surveys were administered, and then a couple months later, in October 2020, the East Troublesome fire happened. And so then that sets us up to ask this question of what can we learn from this fire, this unfortunate opportunity. And so, as we said in the beginning and was sent out in some of the information, this was all written up in a paper that we published a few months ago. It's open access. There's no paywall or anything like that. Anyone can download it and see the details if you're interested there. But we're just trying to provide a little bit more of the broader context and understanding of what's going on there. So if you look at the map, what we're showing here is the 461 assessed structures of the Columbine Lake community. And you can see the community layout. It's surrounding this lake, where it gets its name from. And what the map is showing, a few different things. There's red and blue symbols. Those refer to the structures that were in the community that have assessments. The red ones are the ones that were destroyed in the fire. The blue ones are the ones that survived the fire. The red cross-hatching shapes, that shows the fire perimeter. And you can see the fire kind of wrapped around and went through a lot of different areas of communities, and a lot of the homes within the fire perimeter, they were the ones that were destroyed, but not every home within the fire perimeter was destroyed. And that's really what sets up this question of asking, well, if all these homes were exposed to the fire, why didn't they all burn down? Or similarly, why did some of them burn down and not others? And an important aspect of this is thinking about the broader picture of what's going on in this community. You know, we look at a fire perimeter map and we take that kind of as given, but it's also important to recognize that what's going on the individual properties, whether those homes are burning, whether they become a source of fuel for other places, that actually influences the way that fire perimeter will ultimately look. And so that might influence why you see it kind of wrapping around in the community. And part of that speaks to the fact that there was very active suppression effort. This was an overnight fire coming through this area. There's a lot of overnight activity, and they're working really hard trying to put the fires out. There were ember showers everywhere. So they were driving around, stamping out fires where they could, protecting structures as they could. And the end of the result of that is that throughout the entire community, 6% of the homes were destroyed. Probably could have been a lot worse. It definitely would have been a lot worse without the active suppression involved there. Even within the fire perimeter, about 1 out of every 5 of the homes that were exposed were destroyed there.
And James, I'll just add in too, you know, we talk about, one of the things we find in the research that we've done in the past, you know, is that there is some neighbors behave like neighbors. So again, you see that there's some clustering, and one possible explanation for that is, people that do work tend to influence the folks around them that are doing work as well. Again, with some other examples that we've seen in the past where there's an active participant or a champion in the neighborhood, they start doing the work, the people around them see that. So we tend to see that. And then there's, this other behavior where people maybe don't take mitigation actions. They leave their property, kind of wild and unruly, or, homes are built similarly in certain areas. So sometimes we see clustering, and that can also explain why there might be more receptive areas where homes could be affected, or other areas where homes can survive. So I just wanted to throw that out a little bit too, in looking at some of this and also some other fire examples that we've seen.
And thanks, Chris. That is important to keep in mind as we walk through, and we'll come back to some of those points here. So this entire community had the rapid assessments conducted, and I think Chris mentioned it, but the focus of the rapid assessment is really on these individual attributes, because that's where the actionable information is. But it's also summed to an overall risk score. And so what I'm showing here is two different graphs. The one on the left is for all the structures within the entire community. On the right is within the fire perimeter. You see that they're essentially the same graph. So there's not too much reason to pay attention to one or the other. But what these two graphs are showing on the horizontal axis, that's the overall risk score. So this is a weighted sum of those different attributes Chris was introducing. And then the vertical axis just shows how many homes there are with a given score. And the two different colors, the red refers to the homes that were destroyed. And so in both graphs, we can see very clearly that homes with higher scores, they were more likely to be destroyed. This was both within and without considering the fire perimeter. And that goes to show there's a lot of fire activity going on. There's a lot of suppression activity going on. But there's a meaningful signal coming from this at even the gross high level. If you have a higher risk score, you're more likely to have lost your home in this fire. But we also see that there's a lot of overlap. And so even though it's significant and meaningful, for example, note the red bump on the right side of this graph. That shows there's a little cluster of homes with particularly high scores. And those were some of the destroyed homes. But we also see that there's a similar size bump on the left side of the graph. That's again red. So those homes were destroyed, but they were lower than most of the other homes in the community. And yet they were still destroyed in the fire. And so that just really kind of underscores that there's a lot of things, a lot of information that comes from something like this rapid assessment. And yet there's so many different factors going on. And so by no means is this type of work supposed to be pointing fingers at people and saying it was your fault that you lost your home. There might have been things that you could have done to help, but there's so many other factors involving risk, chance, wind directions, so many things that are not necessarily represented here. And so it's important to keep in mind, there's a lot that we can understand. There's a lot that is still beyond the scope of what we're looking at here. And Chris, did you want to weigh in on that at all from recent experience?
Yeah, just again, talking about wind that you threw out there, certainly the East Troublesome Fire, this extreme growth that occurred, and that, as James mentioned earlier, was a result of a huge pickup in the wind speeds, wind activity, and that can be really, it can change pretty dramatically. Talking about tunnel fire just last week and traveling through some of the neighborhoods outside of Flagstaff that were affected by the tunnel fire, it was, you get to really see how that wind-dominated fire became very active in a certain part of the community, and as that wind might have just died down for a second, then the fire activity, would decrease or move in a different direction. So that those things can really play, as James mentioned, that element of chance can really play a factor in home survivability or destruction.
And so the end result is that all of this is talking about trying to move the needle on risk and increasing your odds, basically. And so this is kind of the meat of the presentation, the meat of the results. This is the outcome of our analysis or statistical analysis of 8 of these 12 attributes were found to be significantly related to which of the homes were destroyed. And some important things to keep in mind here from a statistical perspective, this is really a pretty small sample size. Of course, from a real world perspective, a community, 20 some folks losing their homes is a really big deal. But from a statistical perspective, that 20 some observations is not a lot of information to be coming from. So to be able to pull meaningful signal from that, it is really kind of saying that there's a pretty strong result and pretty strong influence, notwithstanding everything we just said about risk and moving the needle there. Another important point related to that is just because something is not red on this picture, just because we didn't find it as meaningful, doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It could be that we didn't have enough resolution on it. It could mean that it just was a lucky break in this particular fire, or it could just be pure coincidence. But now what I really want to do is kind of dive and just spend a couple minutes really looking in detail, because this is, again, this is kind of the crux of what we found. And the key thing, a couple more key things to keep in mind, is this rapid assessment is built on the best fire science. It's the state of the art of our understanding. So we already knew going into it that all of these elements, the things measured by them, do ultimately matter in reducing the chance that a home would be destroyed in a fire. So really the key element of what this paper and this exercise is looking at is this tool and the performance of this tool and some simple high-level understanding of what's going on property, and how even that basic level of understanding, three levels, looking pretty quickly at a property, can provide a lot of detailed information that is related to whether or not a home is destroyed. So from the parcel level hazard perspective, we do see that the adjacent fuels and the distance to nearest home, those stood out as really strong signals of being related to whether homes are destroyed or not. We also saw in the defensible space category, most of the homes in this community had, for the vegetation, the standard defensible space definition, between 10 and 30 feet. There were some homes that were more than 30 feet. There were some homes that were less than 10 feet. Where they were on that spectrum tended to make a pretty big difference in influencing the risk of if the home was destroyed or not. Similarly, when we looked at the defensible space of other things within those zones, so other combustible materials, this one made a pretty big difference. Again, most of the homes in the community were between 10 and 30 feet between themselves and the combustible materials. But it made a real difference in who lost their homes or not, based on where those other elements were. The access variables were pretty interesting. To be perfectly frank, before this fire came through and we did this exercise, I'd always kind of downplayed these and like, well, they might make a difference, but really, how much does it matter if your address is visible, if that's posted? It turns out this became a really strong signal in terms of whether homes were destroyed or not. That said, and this is part of the importance of really trying to understand what's underlying the data. So we've had a lot of conversations with the folks that were actually on the ground during this fire. And they weren't so sure that the address visibility itself was actually what was making a difference here. You know, they said, sure, in a lot of conditions I get, being able to call resources to a specific address based on whether it's reflective or not, that might matter. But given the conditions and who was there and the way we were operating, that wasn't playing as big a role here. So they offered an alternative explanation that I think is really useful to think about here. And this is one of the easiest, smallest, low-hanging fruit things that a homeowner can do. They can change whether their address is reflective and visible. And that's messaging that's been coming out from Grand County Wildfire Council and from the fire departments on a regular basis. Hey, if you want to reduce your risk, try to do this. And so we think this could be picking up a lot of smaller, more nuanced things that aren't necessarily showing up in a lot of these broad categories. And so this, regardless of the true interpretation of this, we think it's a pretty strong signal that the small actions that people are doing on their communities or on their homes is making a difference or made a difference in whether their homes are destroyed or not in this community. And then finally, one final point here, the structural characteristics we saw, siding material and attachments made a big difference in determining which homes were destroyed, but roof was not. And you might be scratching your head saying, I know roof is always a huge recommendation. And in this community there, I think where 4% of the homes had wood roofs and none of the others did. the 4% that did have it, they were all destroyed. So we have a pretty strong signal, but we don't have the statistics to back it up. And so you don't see them showing up here, but there still is a strong signal. And so I'll just pause for a second in case Chris wants to add anything, but I think I'll move on otherwise.
Yeah, for the sake of time, I know that we want to make sure there's time for questions.
Great. So as we mentioned in the beginning, there's real clustering that we see. And so Chris was describing the clustering in different houses. And one thing that we've seen both here and other places that we work is that neighbors tend to have similar ratings for many of the different attributes. So they have similar levels of defensible space. They might have the same type of siding, or it could even be a bunch of neighbors get together and have the same addressing. And so this really shows kind of a recurring theme and a recurring finding that what people are doing on their property influences what their neighbor's properties will look like. And that could be going through a variety of different ways. They could be talking about it. They could be working together, or it could be a subconscious thing where you drive by a house every day and be like, oh, that looks pretty nice. I might do that defensible space. It looks nice and open, and I can see the home. It looks very clean. So it could be a variety of different functions, but we see this as a common thing going on. We also see this clustering in the homes that were destroyed here. And so this really underscores this point that homes in a wildfire, homes can act as a source of fuel. Normally we think about the home as something we want to protect. And of course that is what we want to do. But it itself, once it starts burning, it's becoming a fuel for all of its neighbors. And so we took those two observations, and that's really what underlied the statistical model. And don't worry about the name of the model or the approach that we took, but the key point of the specifics of the way we did the statistical analysis here is that we were able to see that one home's risky attributes increased not only the chance that that home burned down in this fire, but also the chance that its neighbors burned down. And conversely, all the attributes of one home's neighbors, those influenced the likelihood that that home itself was destroyed in this fire or not. And so this really kind of underscores this very important point that not only are homes a source of fuel, but wildfire risk is something that needs to be addressed and considered at a community level. You can do a lot of things to influence the risk of your own home being destroyed, but if your neighboring structure is in really bad shape from a risk perspective, that is drastically increasing your own risk. So this really is a community issue. And thinking about the way that information flows across community and the way different neighbors can influence each other can really make a big difference here. Chris, would you like to weigh in a little bit?
Again, I know that there's some questions piling up, but I will just continue to go through and cover some things at the end.
Great. So just the final slide that we want to cover here, or the final main slide, is just asking this question of how can this type of data be used to help reduce risk? And so kind of a key point is that this is pretty simple data. It's 12 attributes, 2 or 3, or maybe even 4 levels of an individual thing. And many of the pieces of the rapid assessment are things that are explicitly under homeowner control. So the homeowners can make a difference there. They can act on it directly. However, we've also seen running throughout our work, and this is part of the reason why we pair the information from the rapid assessment with the household survey, people don't necessarily see their property the same way that a professional looking from a trained perspective sees the property. So we've seen time and again in the surveys, people say, yes, I'm doing work. And we know that they mean it, and we know that they are doing work, but it might not be meeting the standards that a professional might want from that. So an important area of where we really interface and how we work is on how to get that information into the hands of homeowners in ways that it's useful. Don't just tell them that they're at high risk, but specific attributes that can be addressed. Your defensible space is a problem, but it goes from there. Once they see that, what are the barriers? How do they overcome that? And so this is why it's really important from our perspective to not just do this type of information and not just look at a broad level, but really interface with local organizations that can provide the support and the information that's needed in a specific community. So with that, we're going to jump to the conclusions, and really, of course, as conclusion slides generally are, this is just repeating everything that we've said and some of the key points. So I'm not going to read every word here, but just the high level things that parcel level risk indeed influenced the outcomes that we saw in this fire. And looking at the individual attributes there, we saw that the pre-fire actions taken by residents, they really did matter for the outcomes. The very quick lens provided by the rapid assessment, these gross categories, even thinking about defensible space as do you have it or not? What level, 5 feet, 10 feet versus 100 feet? That type of scale matters. It's not necessarily about every single individual tree, but it's kind of the broader picture. Neighbors affected each other's risks of being destroyed. Really important finding coming out of this. And then finally, just again, this coarse look, this coarse measure captures the meaningful differences in risk. So with that, I thank you all for your time and attention. And I know we only have a few minutes, but we really encourage folks to follow up with us. We'd love to continue the conversation on this. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks. And as I know, there's some questions in the chat that Rachel's going to be serving up, but just really wanted to, because I know that folks wanted to kind of get to these conclusions. We wanted to make this last slide really simple for you and kind of summarize the things that we've been talking about. And I wanted to kind of circle back to some of the earlier slides and why those are important. Again, those parcel level risk, the details about the parcel level risk conditions really mattered here. And we kind of outlined, and James went into good detail about that. So I just wanted to make sure folks kind of circling back and recognizing the importance of that risk assessment. One of the questions that I saw coming up in the chat, and I'll just go ahead and address it, is, what is the process someone would need to go through to learn how to do rapid assessments and how do communities usually approach that? So we find that there's a lot of different ways that communities approach this and organizations approach this. I think Rachel put a comment earlier in the chat about some tools that are available through FACNM. But again, in the work that we've done across the country, we found that there are various tools that people are using, whether they're from NFPA or they've created themselves, or they're using different tools to do risk assessments. And then, that training comes from just doing it in the field. There's courses that are available. I know in my home state here in Montana, where I live currently, there's a Fire Adapted Montana learning network. And we've been doing an assessment of all of our members to kind of ask the questions about, hey, do we want to have a standard risk assessment in the state? What does it look like? What kind of training do you need? So it takes on different things. When WiRē works with our partners, it is driven by some of the work that they've done. They might have some assessments they have done in the past or a tool that they've used in the past. But we really like to still collect the information that we presented here in those 12, 13 attributes that we look at. And then again, provide, kind of training to make sure that folks' eyes are trained the same. It doesn't necessarily matter so much of if you have multiple people doing the assessment, but really having one person or one group of people looking at a particular area so that that subjectivity is not kind of watering down some of the results you might find. Perfect example of that is in some experiences. Fire department went out and collected it, and they kept having to go to emergency calls, and then a different group of people would come. So those different lenses of looking at the risk really provided, again, a subjective look at the risk. Rachel, I'll hand it over to you for any other questions.
Great. I just want to open it up by saying thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks for staying on a little late. We're trying to give people until about 5 after to ask any questions. And then I also just wanted to check with you guys. Is it all right if I post your contact information, your email addresses in the chat? Okay. So if anyone wants to follow up after this conversation, please use those email addresses to do so.
And one quick point about that, and also Chris's point, everything that we do as FES is open source. So we produce these tools and things like that. And we strongly encourage people to talk with us and work with us to help with that training, but you can access it and you can get the tools and you can get the forms and things like that. So yeah, please send us an email, but at the same time, everything is open access. That is important about the way we do it.
Great. So I appreciate you addressing Johanna's question right off the bat. We had a couple more. I know that this is still in the development phase, but can you talk a little more about the future of this tool?
So as Chris mentioned, we're constantly iterating it and putting the best available science into it. And so a lot depends on the individual partners that we're working with. And I'm guessing Chris wants to speak to that some, because we do tailor it to their specific information needs. But from the research perspective, and there's a lot of information as we've been working in more and more places. And so from the research perspective, it's really linking what we're seeing from the rapid assessment to that survey information, and really trying to move in the next steps of, are there regular patterns between the type of information that people need from reducing risk, whether they need more focus on the home ignition zone or maybe defensible space, or maybe evacuation because their access isn't great. And so thinking about those broad categories and then linking into, information sources or barriers and things like that. So there's a lot of directions that we're going, but those are just a few. And Chris, you probably have a couple that you might.
Yeah, I'll be try to be quick. The risk assessment tool, is one piece of it, and the paired piece of the household survey really, like if we see a professional says that they've got a cementitious sided house, the siding is cementitious, hardy plank or whatever, and the homeowner says that they've got, lap board or wood siding. So like we pair those things together. This household survey goes into a little bit more detail and asks about some of the things, that James was talking about. Are they supportive of, this fuels project that maybe is a big deal in the community that we're working in? Do they have information about, evacuation planning, or are they signed up for the emergency notifications? We ask a lot of questions about insurance because people are very interested in that. So we are constantly iterating this process and tailoring it where we can to our specific partners. One thing that's very important to the work that we've been doing is making it very specific to the local, and making sure people don't assume that what we find in places like Columbine Lakes, working with Grand County, applies to everywhere in America or the West. However, as James said, we've been collecting quite a lot of data, and we do start to see trends. With I think we're close to 40,000 data points that we've collected risk assessment. So we start to see some trends, but again, be very cautious to make sure that, hey, this information is about this place and at this time.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like some really cool things to come out of this then. So Karen made more of a comment than a question, but I would like to follow up on hers. She said that she recalls a fire that burned through a neighborhood near Lake Arrowhead, California. Most of the block was leveled, but there was one house with defensible space and firewise materials, and it was still standing, and the rest of the block downwind was still standing. So sort of building off of that, on the social side of things, do you have any recommendations for how homeowners can reach out to and work with their neighbors to reduce parcel-to-parcel fire spread, that clustering you were talking about?
Yeah, some of it depends on the land use, the platting of those communities. I mentioned Colorado Springs before, where and the same thing is true with Marshall this past year, where the lots are so small and they only have a 5-foot setback. So there's not much that people can do about that there. But in a lot of these places, in a lot of the WiRē communities that you all are in and work in, as I mentioned earlier on, there might be a champion. You all might be those champions in your neighborhood that are doing work and encouraging people to, to participate in the programs that you're accessing or have for you. So one time we see with some of the organizations that we work with, where they are just not, they're scheduling appointments to go out into the communities based on, hey, we need to get 5 people together so that, one, it can be an effective use of their time, and then recognizing the benefit of multiple people working together. So yeah, I appreciate Karen sharing that example of the benefits of somebody doing that work. But definitely encourage folks to make it a community action. We talked about Wildfire Prep Day. This is Wildfire Awareness Week. These are great things to do, is have a professional come out in communities, or as that champion, organize events. And have just a really good look at what your risk assessment is for parcels in maybe your street and on your block or whatever, and then start to make a plan to take some action.
And the one thing that I'll add, I second everything Chris said, but I believe I saw Pam Wilson on the chat earlier. And so just give a shout out to the approach that she used in her organization. And Chris was saying having a professional train, but it doesn't have to be a professional. It could be a volunteer who has really good information. And maybe it's the person who already chats with everyone on the block. Maybe he walks his dog every day, or maybe he's active on Nextdoor, or whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be from a professional. There's a lot of research, ours and many other people, showing that getting information from a trusted local source is what matters. And so whether that trusted local person is your neighbor or the local fire department, that's often less important, the formality of it, than the closeness of that tie. So there are a lot of different models, but certainly working with, willing volunteers, working with a local Eagle Scouts or something like that. There's a lot of different opportunities, but really that local information and using demonstration houses and showing, hey, it doesn't have to look bad. Maybe this actually can look good, or things like that. So there's a lot of things we can talk about there, but I just wanted to give that shout out.
Karen followed up by saying nothing like the teachable moment post-wildfire to motivate folks. That's especially true right now.
Yeah, Karen, I appreciate that. I was able to work with that individual on the tunnel fire, and you're right. Like there is nothing like, unfortunately, these opportunities to really help, take advantage of the time that people are really concerned and active about doing this work. And again, the opportunity to work in a community like Columbine Lake, where we just by chance did this project, and unfortunately this fire happened shortly thereafter. So, definitely want to make the most of these unfortunate situations and learn from them so that we can all be in a better place and become more fire adapted.
And I do want to address, I see Ham's comment, Ham Brown, that they're struck by the observation that most houses within the perimeter actually survived. And sadly, that was not true of a lot of the communities within the burn perimeter of these troublesome fires. So, that speaks to this idea that it was a glancing blow. There was a fighting chance. And it speaks to this general point that everything that we're talking about today is about increasing the odds of your home surviving that fire. There's very little that you can do that would truly guarantee a home wouldn't burn down. But this is all about increasing the odds. And when you start thinking about these coordinated actions and the flow across the community, you can have these multiplier effects. So it's not just what you do on your community, but also changing the flow of that fire throughout the community. And also that this is embedded within fuels treatments, landscape level things. So all these things are interrelated, and that goes back to some of our earlier points that we were making about where our work is situated into the broader idea of the National Cohesive Strategy and the work like that. Because it truly is all hands, all lands. It's not just a cliched saying that people like to say because it rings nicely, but that really is where the solutions come from.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We are out of time, but I would just like to emphasize what you guys said. It is Wildfire Awareness Week, but really wildfire is year round, and wildfire awareness and preparation has to be year round too. So we appreciate you both coming on tonight and speaking to your research, as well as just some of your observations. We appreciate everyone who participated tonight and logged on to hear about what you're working on, and we hope to have you on in the future. Thank you so much.